This is Smarter Cars, a podcast about autonomous vehicles. Welcome to Season 3 of Smarter Cars. This is your host, Michelle Kairouz. In this season of Smarter Cars, we've been talking with our guests about the impact of new mobility services on our cities and how we might need to redesign our roads and curb management in order to accommodate everything from autonomous ride services to scooters. Today we talk with San Francisco Supervisor Matt Haney, who's been a leader in thinking about new mobility services and how they impact cities. Supervisor Haney, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Great. Well, you have focused on some important issues like homelessness, mental health, and clean streets in San Francisco. Why is transportation also an important issue for the city, and what are the concerns that you hear from folks that you talk to?
Well, I have the benefit of representing a district that has a lot going on, for sure. It's sort of our downtown core, the Tenderloin, south of Market. Most of the major tech companies are there. We also have the majority of people who are living on our streets who are homeless are in my district, one of the 11 districts, but we have over 50% of people who are homeless. Wow. So we have a lot of challenges, and we're also the area of the city where we have, I'd say, the most concentrated transportation questions and challenges, to put lightly. We have the most people who are coming through. Either they're traveling through my district on BART or on Caltrain, biking downtown to work, walking. Hundreds of thousands of people walking through the district every day. So there are huge questions, not just for San Francisco, but for the entire Bay Area, for California, that are really centered in District 6 in San Francisco. So there's really, as we think about a sustainable, equitable city, one where people can get to work, get home safely, get around the city, not be stuck in constant congestion or be in danger as they walk or bike down the street. A lot of that is centered in and around my district. So it's shot up the list very quickly as one of the things that has been a top priority for me in office.
Yeah, you really kind of have a microcosm of all of the issues right there in your district. How many years have you lived in San Francisco? I
have lived in San Francisco about 14 years, and I'm from the Bay Area, so I grew up in the East Bay. My family's from San Francisco, so I've been around the city for a long time, but have been in San Francisco since, I think, 2007.
Yeah, so how do you feel like the city has changed, particularly the neighborhoods that you represent? As you pointed out, there's been so much economic growth and growth in the number of people coming through your district. How do you feel like the city's changed from a transportation perspective? If you kind of think back, in terms of how people get around, how do you feel like that's changed over the years?
Well, we didn't have Uber and Lyft back then, I can tell you that. And if you wanted to get a taxi, you would call, and then you'd have to wait for 20 or 30 minutes. So we'd say, we're going out, make sure to call the taxi now because we're going to be ready in 30 minutes. That was a very different situation. And then sometimes they wouldn't come. And then you'd call again and again. They'd have these, operators, and you try to get one that liked you, and so it was a whole other different situation in that regard. We didn't all have smartphones, so we couldn't just go on and say, all right, here's when it's coming, and everything is on GPS, and all of that. So gosh, it feels like I'm talking about like the Stone Ages or something. I think that there were a lot less people who were biking around the city. There were very few, if any, protected bike lanes. I think since 2006, biking in the city has tripled. So I think that the degree of biking around the city. Obviously, we didn't have the Salesforce Trans Bay terminal downtown, and I think that because there wasn't also the degree of tech jobs and development. This was before Uber and Lyft, not only as transportation, but in terms of the thousands and thousands of employees that they and Airbnb and Twitter and Facebook, Google, et cetera, have brought downtown. The degree of transportation from the peninsula and from the East Bay into San Francisco for jobs downtown, I think, has greatly increased. So thinking about how we get people, into the city, Caltrain, Fourth and King, which is also in my district, and the role that plays, I think, is a much more critical part of our transportation infrastructure. So back then we walked, we had taxis, we had BART, we had Muni. Now we have much more important role for Caltrain. We got high-speed rail, we got biking, and we got Uber and Lyft. So there's a lot more going on.
Yeah, absolutely. What I remember most about that time period is just, that basically you had to drive. There were just so many times and places where you thought, gosh, I can't get transit, or I won't be able to get a cab. So whether you were going out to dinner, to the ballpark, or whatever, it seems like it was very much kind of a drive and park culture. And I think, like many cities in in California, the city was basically designed figuring that a lot of people, whether they were going downtown for work or going out to dinner, would need a place to park, and sort of driving and parking was the main way that a lot of people ended up getting around. But now, as you say, we've got Uber and Lyft, we've got bikes and electric scooters and all these different things.
Right.
How can we change the way we allocate space on our streets to kind of reflect some of these changes in how people are getting around? I feel like there's kind of still a lot of parking, and yet people are moving away from driving and parking. The more they want to take an Uber or ride a bike or something like that. How can we change our streets?
Well, it's interesting because there's so much more of a demand for kind of short, loading type situations in a way that there weren't. So it's an interesting thing because it feels like there are more cars on our streets, and I think there are more cars on our streets, but their need for parking is so much reduced because of what role those cars are playing. An important piece of this that I think gets often left out of the conversation is not only the Uber and Lyfts, but also all of the delivery services, the Postmates and the DoorDash and all of that. And
Amazon.
And Amazon. So, in terms of best use of curb space, I think that has changed dramatically, and our city has not caught up yet. I mean, I think ultimately, and we'll see how quickly we can get there, although I know some cities like New York are doing a lot more of this, that a lot of the spots, if not the majority of the quote-unquote parking spots in my district will probably begin to transition over time either to be removed for bike lanes or other types of transportation, or be used for loading. I think that there's a much greater need for loading curb space in a way that there wasn't obviously 10 years ago. So I think all of that is changing. Obviously, there's the bigger question of how we shift our sort of streets to be just more friendly in general to other types of transportation other than cars. But right now there's too many spots for parking. I think sort of in my neighborhood, I sort of look around, I'm like, I don't really know what role a lot of these parking spots are filling.
Who are these people who park on the street?
I mean, who park on the street. Yeah, but with that said, we also have, some folks have families, and they need to drop kids off at different schools and around the city, and we haven't fully transitioned either to a place where everybody can survive realistically without a car. So it's sort of we're in that kind of in-between space. If you got a bunch of little kids, they can't all jump on the bus and go in all different directions either. So
exactly. Now, when you talk to people who have been in the transportation planning space for a long time, and you talk about, hey, shouldn't we get rid of some of this street parking and reallocate it to kind of a greater curb use with pickup and drop off zones and things like that, they just go nuts and say, well, gosh, we've wanted that forever, but, it's just like a political hot potato. You start talking about street parking and people get really upset. It's sort of a difficult political issue, but I kind of feel like maybe the tide is changing there, that maybe there's enough people who want to ride in an Uber or ride a bike or get dropped off by a bus that maybe the political winds are shifting. How do you feel in the conversations you have?
Well, my district is interesting because we don't have hardly any kind of single family homes. We're sort of, so that expectation that you can park right out in front of your house and that it's going to be there and all of that, I in the downtown areas, it's in fact, we get some resistance from some of the businesses, but even the businesses, I think, understand now that there's actually a value to having more of a turnover in front of their businesses.
Right.
And so I think there is a shift, and it's not only in my district where I think maybe it's a little easier to have a conversation about alternatives because a lot of people are living in big apartment buildings and they either have a parking spot inside their building or they've already learned to survive without a car, and would probably be open and interested in different ways that they can get an Uber more easily. For example, we just had a survey that came out that showed that over 70% of the survey respondents in San Francisco are actually using Uber and Lyft. So it's a much higher percentage even than people who are using Muni, even people who are driving themselves. So we, whether we have concerns about how those companies are operating or whatever it is, we're going to have to shift, to a reality that deals with that.
Yeah, it seems like if you just look at it from a reality perspective and say, okay, well, this is actually how people are getting around, the natural thing to do is to free up more space for that mode and to dial back the street parking. I think people complain about all the traffic that Uber and Lyft create, but of course, private cars were creating that traffic also. But, it seems like we could address some part of that traffic problem by simply devoting more space, on our streets by removing the street parking. So I guess it's about kind of getting our arms around reality. But let's talk about protected lanes for micromobility for bikes and scooters. Can you tell us about some of the things that you've done in your district and kind of where you'd like to see the city go in terms of making room on the street for these other modes that are, arguably better throughput and better for the environment?
Yeah, I mean, I think that for me, this became very real, and it did for a lot of us, and for many of the advocates, this has been real for a long time. When we lost a few people to crashes this year. There was one woman, Tess Rothstein, who was struck and killed by a vehicle on Howard Street in south of Market. And I arrived there right after it happened. The ambulance and the fire trucks and everybody were still there. And she was just on the other side of a street where there was not a protected bike lane. So she had been riding on a protected bike lane and crossed 6th Street where there was not. She was just short of a protected bike lane. So beyond 6th Street there was a protected bike lane, and she just was before 6th Street. And for a lot of us, that just demonstrated that this. Yes, it's an issue of convenience and sustainability and a city that functions and all that, but it's also a life or death issue for people who are traveling by bike in our city. And so for me and for many others, we just at that point said we just can't wait anymore. This has to happen. There are thousands and thousands of people who are riding their bikes on our streets, who are doing so in situations that are incredibly dangerous, and our city is putting them in that situation in many ways. So, thankfully we've seen some movement since then. Now Howard Street will have a fully protected bike lane, the full length of Howard. We were able to extend it immediately a couple blocks, and now they're going to do the rest of it. And so as I look at what is happening across, in particular in my district, where we have right now a lot of people who are riding every day to work and back and to home, and I'm frustrated because I don't know what's slowing us from actually, building a fully protected bike lane infrastructure and network that I think should have been done, unfortunately, years ago.
Well, that was my question for you, because I think everyone kind of looks around and all right, and we're all these young tech people, and they're used to everything happening fast and all that, but still, like, it doesn't sound like any the quick build projects and everything. Like, turns out you're able to do them pretty quickly. So what is taking the SFMTA so long? Like, why is everything 3 to 5 years to get done, and how can we kind of cut through that bureaucracy?
Good question. I've had a hard time with that too, and I think in some cases when we've really pushed and we've really demanded it and we've organized, things have happened quicker. And I think Howard Street over the last few months is an example of that, and we're seeing a broader prioritization of some of these corridors in South of Market now. But as you said, it often takes a few years. They have a whole design process that they do, a whole outreach process that they do. I mean, some of these things are a little tricky for reasons that you spoke to earlier, which is that a lot of these streets have been designed for parking and have certain driveways and have certain turn. I mean, there is some levels of complication on some of the streets because you're blocking people's driveways, and how do people get in and out and all of that, and turning and everything. So, but I don't think that it should take 4 or 5 years, to build a pretty simple protected bike lane on a street. And so we're really pushing to accelerate timelines. My expectation is the rest of Howard Street will be done next year, which is a very quick timeline for them. And but there are some things that we can do immediately. Putting up right now, we have bike lanes that are out there right now that if they just had some better posts and some better paint, that there would be a much stronger protection for the people who are using them. So we've been also asking for that, just the simple, quick build protections.
Right.
And then some of the others require a sort of a longer design process. But how can we shorten that and get it done quicker? And San Francisco has this weird structure where we have our SFMTA is independent, and so the Board of Supervisors and the mayor doesn't have the same level of sort of ability to accelerate projects in a way that we do on other types of city services.
I've asked SFMTA about, why does it take so long, and is there a problem with money? Like, is it because this is expensive, or you need a fund or anything like that? And the answer is no. Basically, it's not that hard and it's not that expensive, but it just takes, kind of time and effort and process to get done. And so it seems like the more kind of public pressure that's being put has really accelerated at least some of these quick build projects.
Well, I mean, for a lot of issues, our challenge is money. People say, well, why don't you fix homelessness or affordable housing? And so it costs billions of dollars. Well, actually, a bike lane is very cheap.
Yeah.
Once it's been approved, it can get done in a couple weeks in terms of actual, posting and all of that. So it's really more about the process of doing the design and the outreach and the limited, let's say, sort of prioritization, or they can only do a handful of streets at one time, I guess. So that's more what I hear from them. But still, we want it to go quicker.
Yeah, and I saw, they did amend the transportation code to allow the SFMTA staff to make certain improvements and do these quick build projects. Are there any other kind of process changes? We're looking to new leadership at the SFMTA. Are there other kind of changes you'd like to see at SFMTA?
There are a number. I've also been dealing a lot with pedestrian safety, and we've had a similar situation where there have been some intersections that have just been dangerous for so long, and we've known that, and it took someone being hit by a car, or in some cases hit and killed, to see that rapid change. And I want to see them be much more proactive. I mean, if we understand that we have dangerous intersections where we should have, a pedestrian scramble where we separate people who are walking from the time when people are crossing from when people are turning, and we should do that. We should immediately do that. We shouldn't have to wait until somebody's hurt in order to move that forward. So I'd like to see a plan advance quickly on that. I think some other cities have had a standard where if any work is being done on a street, that there are certain standards around pedestrian and bike safety that are put in place as a part of that. I think we've been talking to the MTA about what that might look like. I think that the new head of the MTA needs to get much more serious about how we work with, partner, cajole, whatever it is, with rideshare companies. I think that in many cases we do these huge street redesigns and tens of millions of dollars and all sorts of things, many of them great things, but they would completely ignore the existence of Uber and Lyft, and it wouldn't include any pickup and drop off spots, so how do we, in this new environment where I think there's a lot more of an appetite to play hardball with them, but also integrate them into how we think about our street and design and transportation infrastructure, that we do that much more proactively, and that we partner in order to do that. So that's one thing I hope to see out of the new leader of the MTA.
Now, Tom McGuire was named interim chief. Is he being considered for the permanent position as well?
I'm not sure. They haven't shared that with us. Ultimately, I believe it's a decision of the MTA board, although I'm sure the mayor has some role, but the Board of Supervisors doesn't have any role with it.
Okay. So so let's switch to talking about bikes and scooters, this new micromobility. Another way to get people out of their cars is obviously to, as you say, build this infrastructure, build the bike lanes and the better pedestrian improvements, but also to provide more access to shared bikes and scooters. The SFMTA has had very limited numbers of bikes and scooters under their permit program. Would you like to see more electric bikes and scooters be made available in San Francisco, particularly serving communities of concern?
Yes, absolutely. I don't think that we have enough that are out there. I think sometimes with the Go bikes, where it's the stationary ones, they're all being used. They're not available. People also want the other ones that are kind of freestanding, and I think that we can do it in a smart way. I understand why the city wanted to pull back a little bit in the beginning when it kind of felt like a free-for-all. They're just all over the place, and we hadn't really figured out how to regulate them effectively. But I think we've now swung the pendulum too far in the other direction, that they're not as widely available as they should be, in a way that they can actually really be integrated into someone's daily life and their planning and their transportation routine. And so I hope that we correct for that in the coming year as we think about bringing more of those both electric bikes and scooters onto the streets. And I think that it's helpful that we are also building out our protected bike lane infrastructure. I mean, ultimately, a lot of concern is also on some of these bikes and scooters having people ride them on the sidewalks and without helmets and those kind of things, which, I think that as we, alongside the growth of the number on our streets, we create an infrastructure that allows them to be ridden safely. I think that there's a lot of hope in I think in a year or two, you'll probably see thousands and thousands of people riding those all over the city in bike lanes, and that would be a good thing.
Yeah, it seems like, the complaints about scooters were people riding them on the sidewalk, which of course is because they don't feel safe riding them on the street, and then people parking them in places that kind of blocked access or what have you, which has, largely been helped by using lock to mechanisms and things of that
Yeah.
nature. But of course, all you have to do is, carve out some parking spaces for scooters, and a lot of people will use them. So it seems like if we can get the infrastructure along the lines you're talking about with more lanes and places for people to ride safely, that it would alleviate a lot of the concerns that cities have had about scooters and bikes.
Yeah, I mean, I think there have been some good changes. I hear a lot less about people blocking sidewalks and things. I think they've done some smart things around that, and the companies have had to innovate in order to address a lot of these issues that and questions that the cities have had. And I think that now we should recognize that there have been some changes and open it up a little bit more. I think it's a good thing getting people out of their cars, getting people onto scooters and bikes and all sorts. And I don't know why we would want to hold back that desire for people to use that form of transit.
Right. So San Francisco is a transit first city and has had that policy for a long time. But transit ridership here, as in many cities, is down. And some people want to blame the existence of Uber and Lyft for that decline. And then there are other people who say, well, gee, if the buses ran faster and on time, people would ride them. What can the SFMTA do to make people want to ride transit in places where it makes sense?
Well, they could show up on time. They could deal with the crowding issues. I mean, a lot of people, if you don't want to have a situation where, if you have any sort of other option, you choose it over transit, public transportation. And unfortunately, that's been the sense that a lot of people have had about public transportation in San Francisco. So we've been trying to do some things to address that, whether it's putting more and better buses and trains out on the streets, improving on-time performance, and then actually changing the design of our streets to allow for a faster Muni service. The Market Street, for example, we're going to completely redesign Market Street, and it's going to be in a way that allows for buses and trains to move much quicker down the street. And some of that is also related to Uber and Lyft. I was just at something for 2nd Street, and right now you've got so many turns, left turns, and you've got drop-offs happening in the middle of the street. And so, you hop on a Muni bus and you're going to, good luck navigating that in any sort of, efficient time frame.
Not to
I
mention
think all
when
of
there's
those things.
construction going on.
Yeah, it's just, people won't do it. So I think all of that is needing to change.
Yeah. All right. Well, final question. There has been some tension over all of these issues between the SFMTA and the tech community, companies that are innovating in the transportation space, whether it be the TNCs or the scooter companies. And many in the tech community feel there's been kind of an overreaction or backlash against micromobility as a result. What do you think the city can do going forward to foster a better dialogue on these issues with the tech community in order to continue to encourage innovation?
Well, it's interesting because we have the benefit of having a lot of these companies here. And a lot of them will say, hey, if we can't work with our own city, how are we going to, we're expanding all over the world and all over the country, and yet San Francisco won't talk to us. So I think we can start by changing that. We can really have much more of an open dialogue, a partnership, of learning from each other, of kind of planning together in different ways. I mean, these things are out there and they're happening. And I think, unfortunately, transportation agencies have often, wanted to either keep things the way that they are, or at least plan as though they don't exist, or
Right.
or sort of say, well, we can't control those things, so we're not going to talk about them. It's like,
Yeah.
okay, well, have you opened your eyes lately? They're
Yeah.
everywhere. So and they're coming, right? And and people want them, and so you also shouldn't deny if people are making transportation choices, that we should view that as a good thing, particularly when it's getting people out of cars, and we
Yeah.
should try to figure out how to facilitate it in a way that works for our city rather than try to stop it. And I think that the situation with the taxis and Uber and Lyft is kind of instructive around that, not just for San Francisco, but for other cities and for California, that we didn't really get ahead of this, even though we saw it coming, we saw it growing every year. And so the situation that we're in is not only did the taxi industry get decimated, but our infrastructure, our planning didn't take into consideration, all of these changes around how people were getting around. So I'd like to see us open more dialogue. I'd like to see us work together. I'd like to see us, plan understanding how these technologies work, and create a city where people can make choices about how they get around in a way that fits their own sort of needs and convenience, and also has more sustainability and less congestion, better for the environment, better for people's wellness.
Yeah.
And that's the city shouldn't be getting in the way of that. I mean, I think that the companies, and not just the companies, but the people who use those modes of transportation are probably right, that we probably have gotten in the way. The city has gotten in the way.
All right. Well, I guess we'll leave it there. Thanks so much for coming on the podcast.
Sure.
It was great talking with you. I look forward to
Yes, thank
following what you're doing in your district and across the city.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks again to Supervisor Haney for joining us. You can find the show notes for this episode and all of our episodes, as well as policy articles, on our Medium publication called Smarter Cars. Thanks again for listening. We'll see you next time.